All right, so I'm starting by using this filter in Teams. We'll see how it works because I'm really going to be annoyed if when I go to share the screen, I got to get rid of my filter. Basically, I just wanted to kind of do a video, a little lesson on kind of where I would start with the ITERs. I included a video that is like so ridiculously long on how to complete the ITERs, and it's also about the most boring video I've ever watched. I think it makes ITERs more confusing than anything, but some people really wanted to get going, and given how they were invited into classrooms, that's what made sense. So, um, this might help people and resolve some, stress. If you get into a situation where you already had to start or do something, then this is the time to communicate with me because I'm a fairly reasonable person and I will help you and I will help you strategize what to do. But if you don't communicate with me about what's happening, I can't help you. Um, we still have to get through certain assignments, but there may be certain things we can work with. I also haven't heard from anybody that they're at a center that only has infants or only has toddlers or something, because that's something I need to know because these assignments are set up that so you're getting experience in an infant room and a toddler room, so you can put that on your um, resume, but also because we want you to see like how different infants and toddlers are just months apart. It's a very critical like part of the course. So the ITERs in an ideal situation, you would get to the end of the semester and I'd be like, okay, now you need to do an ITERs because an ITERs kind of gives you this way of assessing developmental appropriate practice in an infant or a toddler classroom. There's Eckers for preschool, and there's family ones. There's all sorts of, but they're a great way of looking at the different areas that are really critical to a quality program. And while I say that it'd be like ideal to do at the end, it may also be, we can flip that and say this is a great way to kind of introduce yourself to the areas of developmental practice and how they're applied in a classroom. Um, and so we can just use it like that too. The problem is that some people are in those classrooms already and they need to do the assessment, but we haven't even covered it yet and we haven't covered that part of DAP yet. So it can feel like the blind leading the blind. But if you switch that in your head as to, well, this is just my introduction, and it kind of does all come together at the end because classrooms and learning are very layered processes, right? So we have to, some of us may get the introduction to the information in our texts. Some of us may try to do the ITERs or may have already tried to do the ITERs and they're like, okay, whatever. And then at the end, though, the hope is, okay, I see it. I see how it all goes. So this is going to be I'm going to do a couple of different ones just on different sections of the ITERs that I think are confusing. I'm going to have a start on actual page 9, and I'm starting. Oh, look, you can't even see it because I got my green screen. That's all right. It'll be obvious. All right, we're going to use the third edition. If you don't have the third edition, I can't tell you that you're going to have the right page. And the third edition is really quite different from the second because they've really updated things to go along with the OCFS policies and different things that are now current. So I'm going to try to share my screen and see how this goes. It doesn't look like it's going too good yet. Let me see. Yeah, I think I have to take off the stupid background. Let me see. Record transcribe here. Yeah, none. Now you get to see my bedroom, which I'm still working on, which is kind of why I don't want people to see it, but that's all right. Okay, so I'm switching to that, and now it's going to let me go to my screen, I hope. It's not. All right. This is just like being in a classroom, except now I'm filming my mistakes live on Teams. All right, here. Share my screen again. Go to here. I'm not starting over because I can't tell you how many times I've already started over. All right, so I'm going to start here from the beginning. I'm on the ITERS edition 3. Okay, and hopefully you can see this. Anna's ITERS training. Okay, so I went right to the page 9 where it says administration of the scale. And unfortunately, if you already started, you're probably like, I don't understand any of this. Oh my God. And so if you haven't started, I'm saying skip those pages for now. I'll tell you, like, as you go on and get experience, they make more sense. But for our purposes, we're going to start on page 9. There's some basics that you have to make sure that you're paying attention to when you go to do the ITERs. Now, we are going to take it however we get it. So if you're in a classroom and the teacher's like, you can do this at the beginning of your shift, the end of your shift, whatever, or they keep wanting you to, clean and do whatever. You're a guest. Do it the way they want you to do it. I would, if you get to make a decision about it, I would, and I've had students do this, they will talk to their mentor or teacher. I know some of you don't do that very well. They will talk to them and be like, I have this ITERS. It says it's going to take about 3 hours. Could I just have one of my slots with you be to do that? Or would you like me to come in at a different time? Or could I do it over 3 days and do like an hour each day kind of thing? Okay. But you have to definitely talk to the people that are hosting you. And the real important thing for us for this class is that you get to kind of go through the scale and look at the different areas of the classroom and try to assess it. We won't worry about if you did it for 3 hours, if you did it all at one time, if if you have to go back and fix things or find things out, we're going to be good with that. We just want you to have the experience of going through the process. It's one of those things. One, it helps you understand what they really want you to have in a classroom. It helps you understand, like, if this is a place that you think is doing a pretty good job, it can help you to understand how sometimes things are carried out a little differently than how they may get assessed. And it may also, you may have a good program, but maybe this would be the difference between it, like leveling up, okay, and being an excellent program. Our purpose is not to grade or score per se the classroom you're in. We're not judging it or anything. It's the process of seeing how to score it, um, and to understand, like, if we wanted to get it to a 7, most things are, you can get scored 1 to 7 on something. What would we have to do? It just helps us understand like what the requirements are. So make sure you're working out of the 3rd edition. I told you about the 3-hour block, right? And that if you take 240 with me later on in your educational time, you'll understand a time sample is just a type of observation. It occurs during, it takes a certain amount of time to do it. It's a sampling, obviously. There are often areas in a time sample where, like, well, on that day, they weren't doing it. You don't give them like fantasy scores, right? That's fine. Maybe they do it 80% of the time, but during the time sample, it's what you observe at that time. Okay. And that's an important difference if you're ever getting observed with an ITERS in a classroom you're running, because they expect it to be there because it's considered something that's supposed to be hopefully an element, like a permanent part of that classroom, right? So they aren't thinking like, oh yeah, it's there like 90% of the time or 70% of the time when I feel like it. It's either there, it's not. And so that's why they don't like give you a ton of wiggle room. Now that's going to be different with infants, right? We're not going to leave certain things out when we have some infants that maybe can't move, some that are crawling. Like there's different things that are criteria at different ages, which is why some of the pages I'll have you look at based on the ages of the people in your room will be important. All right. So it does say that really an ITER should be conducted during the busiest time of the day. And so generally that's like that 8:30 or 9 to 11:30 or 12. Sometimes infants are busy all day long, right? Because they sleep on demand, and that's what's developmentally appropriate. So it can change quite a bit from depending on the ages. And again, you're going to do the ITERs as you can as a guest. You can't be messing up their schedule or what they do. we're a guest. It should be something that kind of occurs seamlessly without like you interrupting their flow. So that's another reason why, like, you can't, and I would do this too, probably as a college student. I would not even open this thing till I got there. And then I'd be like, I do not understand. This is like in a different language. That's not going to work. So, really, before you go, you need to understand what you're going to look at. And it may end up based on how your hours are scheduled that there's certain subscales like sections. Maybe you'll do 2 or 3 sections or one section a day, and that'll be the easiest way for you to keep it straight. And that's fine too. We're going to do whatever we can just to have you have the experience. For me, I'm going to need a little notebook so I can take really good notes. I'm probably going to have to copy a couple things out of here. I may bring it with me just because, well, I'm probably going to have to bring it with me because there's certain things that if you're not looking at, you won't know how to grade it. The only thing I could do if I really wanted something smaller and I'm not sure it would get you anywhere would be if I photocopied like whatever the section is. But I'm not sure you gain enough. If you like have a post-it note so you can flip there quickly, you can kind of see, and you'll see what I'm talking about. We don't write in ours just because they're pretty expensive. What are they like 44 now? 30 to 44, something like that. And you need to do two, right? And if you don't write in it, then you can keep utilizing it. The one I'm using is actually one a student filled out and then gave it to me. So this one isn't even blank. I'm not sure if I have a third edition blank one or not, or if I do, it's at school. There's a score sheet in the back. I'd probably photocopy that just so I could keep it straight. It's very different. Like you have to be able to flip in the spiral thing from to the section to the score sheet, right? So I'd probably want to photocopy the score sheet so I can just be writing on it. But for us, since we aren't going to turn in the entire ITERS and you're going to probably it's an asynchronous class, so you're probably going to need to turn it in some kind of digital way. I do have, I have to see if it's up to date with this version. I have a score sheet, I believe, that I already typed in that you can fill in. I'll see how up to date it is and I'll post that. Um, so let's see. It does say in order to do this, and I think I've done this with students a lot, and I think we've often forgotten it. So when you start a section and you're about to score it, you want to be keeping track of the time, because time sampling means you're supposed to know how long it takes you. That's part of the validity of it. So if you're marking that in your notebook and keeping track of the section, that's fine, because you're going to need to kind of collate or bring all this information together so you can present it to me and probably to classmates. We'll practice that. Again, a little bit of an ask for you to communicate with your mentor teachers so they know what you're doing. Sometimes when people do these, they get a little bit nervous and they might be acting different, and your teacher probably needs to know why. All right, a little bit of advice they give you, which honestly, sometimes for me, I'm like, well, that's obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway, because sometimes when I think something's obvious, it's because I've been doing it too long. So if you're doing an observation, in order to really do it, it's not always the same as when you come in and are a part of the classroom environment. And if you do need to do it and still be a part of the classroom environment based on how you're getting your hours or whatever your mentor teacher wants you to do, then you need to do that. But in order to really get a feel, you shouldn't be the teacher in the room per se, and then scoring yourself. And if that's the situation, I'm trying to think if I think everybody's doing it in a different classroom. I think maybe one of you is doing it in your classroom you work in, but it it still may be enough that you're not the head teacher or something. So that's just because you're going to be observing like interactions and scoring them as positive, neutral, negative, things like that. And how are you going to do that with yourself while you're actually having the interactions, right? So in order to have it be a really good learning experience, we may want to also ask if you could do it in a different classroom or do it while someone's in there. We'll see. Sometimes I do have head teachers, and then we need to think about how we're going to do it. Let's see. Ideally, you're not going to interfere with what's going on. So and I have had people do this, like they're doing something. So they got all their stuff and they've got it spread all out. That may not be safe to be have in a classroom. You go in, you have just a notebook, maybe a clipboard, and in infants, you really got to be careful with those crazy metal clipboard things. And you're being there, you're sitting, not blocking things, maybe being quiet. You shouldn't be like having some big conversation. You don't want to, and I'm seeing all sorts of typos on here because I've been rushing to get this done. If it doesn't, so you don't want to interfere with the program, you can sit in a chair, whatever. But if they're going to move, or if it's blocking people from doing what they're going to do, you need to probably get out of the way. Let's see. Try not to get so lost in what you're doing. And if it happens and it's an accident, just like when you realize it, adjust, right? But be sensitive to what's happening around you. When you go to score things, it's going to ask you if things are accessible. It's not asking you if you know what's in cabinets or not accessible. When they ask you specifically if some materials are available on the shelf, it doesn't mean, yeah, on Tuesdays at 5. Okay, so really your assessment, and that's why sometimes these come out a little lower than even. So look at the materials that are in plain view, but don't go searching around things, right? Make sure you don't leave you shouldn't be doing this anyway. Hopefully this was covered with your orientation. You don't want to leave your tote bags or purses. Probably better to not bring them in at all. I often don't even bring my cell phone, and I know at the KUKA Center they have to put their phones in their lockers and stuff. We should be following any rules that are followed at the center we're at. If you're working with another observer, like that's not the time to be having a conversation. And if you have follow-up questions, try not to do that in a way that's interrupting the class. You can ask clarifying questions later, or only if it's not in a way that interrupts what they're doing. And then when I'm observing, I try not to have a reaction to what my students are doing or whoever I'm observing, because they're looking at me to get some kind of like, I try to just be, I mean, I don't do it very well sometimes, but like I also don't sit there and be like, oh my God, what are they doing? Like I might be like encouraging, like, and nod, but I'm not gonna, you don't want them to be looking for you to make sure they're getting scored correctly. That's not your role. You're there to learn. So this shouldn't come across like you're in there doing some major, like, I'm gonna tell you how you scored. That's not what we're doing. And then it says in here that whenever you go in a classroom to do an ITERS, you should wash your hands. Apparently, I don't know that I've always done that, but it's a no-brainer, right? When I go in as a guest, I should wash my hands so I'm not giving them germs I have. Now on page 11, the more scoring information just going in, because we skipped from, the first 8 pages because it's like, wow, weeds. And now 11, read the different sections you're scoring prior to the observation time. Be familiar with what you're going to be looking for. It's going to go a lot more smoothly. Keep the scale and scoring info handy to refer to as you complete sections. It's easy to forget. Sometimes I forget things I've done for years because I need to remember it at that moment. Examples that differ from these, sometimes there are things they give as indicators to help you score. And there might be things that you're like, no, this is very similar. This is the same. We can use this. Just make notes. We can decide later, right? And then when scoring an item, always start reading from 1 and go upward, because the way this score works, if you don't, sometimes people in programs will have things in 7, but they don't have enough things in the lower areas to get a 7. And those lower areas are foundational things. So we start from 1 and then we go up, and our final score is really based on what was the last section we had all the things were indicated, and then the section that we have half is that's where we stop, and then I think we go to the one below it, right? But we'll go there and so this is like, who came up with this? I don't know. So a rating of 1 is given if an indicator under 1 is scored yes. So let's go. I'm going to just go to one of these score sheets. So all right. So these are like not, so if it's diapering, almost no attention given to ensuring sanitary diapering. If you say yes, that's like a negative thing. So that's immediately you're only getting a 1. Do you say they just as a base level, they want you to have all the 4 things in 1 to get to 2. And so when you go to 2, a 2 is given when all indicators under 1 are scored no, and at least half the indicators under 3 are scored yes. So basically, if you get 1 score of a yes, so if I'm under a 2, I'm under a 3. Yeah, this is it. This is where it's like, what is this? Why does this have to be so difficult? So I'm still on diapering. So if I go to a 3, some attempts made to attempt to meet sanitary requirements. Children were cleaned well, diapering surface cleaned between uses, but not according to required procedure. Diapering toilet schedules generally meet children's needs, etc. So it says a rating of 2 is given when all of the indicators under 1 are no. So those are good. They did them all. And at least half the indicators under 3 are scored yes. So there's only 4 under 3. So if they have half of those scored yes, that means we can't get a 3 because we need them to all be there. That's why we're going up from 1 and up. Okay. And it's not meant to be like, this isn't you rating, this is just us learning how this is done. And so you can also learn a lot too, like some of the things, it might be like things that aren't accessible. Whereas, you do want your place where you're with your children to make sure they're cleaning the diaper area correctly, right? And so to get a 7, for diapering, it says sanitary procedures are carried out correctly almost all the time with only a few minor lapses. Diapering toileting schedule is almost always individualized, meaning, and it says in parentheses, staff notice when infant needs to be changed, periodically asks toddlers and 2s if they need to use the toilet. And then teaching interactions are frequently observed. Staff teach child self-help skills such as hand washing when they're ready. All children are talked to. So like that diapering is an opportunity to talk about math or language, counting toes and buttons and all of that. So hopefully that helps a little bit. I'm going to include probably a video. There's a couple students that did this and they were losing their minds. And so they just did a little helpful video. And that's probably easier for you guys. And you could probably relate to it more than me because I'm like, oh, this is so obvious. But I haven't done it in a long time. Not as a first assignment, right? So once you go in for the time when you go in the classroom, the time sampling, you want to do the initial scoring of the 1 to 7. We're going to do the other thing later where you compile all the information. There'll be another video. But you have to get the scores that you have to observe in the classroom in order to do them while you're at your site, right? So you want to collect that data, but you shouldn't be sitting there trying to figure out how to do final scores while you're in the classroom. Collect the data you need, you know which things you need, and you go on. There are some definitions we need to know, and I would recommend that you spend time on some of these things as you go forward. And actually already I was going to delete this and just have it be accessible because it made sense to break these down. So the definition for something being accessible, I've already talked about it a couple times. It means that children can read and use the required material or equipment. And it's different for ages, depending on the ages of the infants and the toddlers. Like there's really different exceptions. So if based on the children in your class, you want to read that before you go in to assess it, not access. All right, so interactions. This is like, I meant to move all of them over to here. So definitions refers to the ways in which staff relate to the children under their care. Um, So they can consist of both verbal and nonverbal, or even physical contact, okay? And nonverbal gestures. If someone's rolling their eyes, like, oh, I can't believe they don't just walk so I can change their diaper, that'd be negative, okay? So negative interactions can make a child feel like there's anger, coldness, disrespect, impatience, lack of interest, or unhappiness from the caregiver, not the child per se. Positive interactions, they're conveying happiness, contentment, relaxation, patience, respect, and interest. And neutral, we're not perfect. Sometimes, we are focused on what we have to get to next. And so there's going to be times where it's more neutral. What you want is to not have all negative interactions. Like that would indicate maybe someone's not in the right classroom. Maybe they're having a hard time or bad day or whatever. Um, and also don't be fair. Okay. So other definitions that seem important that they list in here specifically is when they're talking about a staff member, they're talking about anyone who works with the children during the observation, weather permitting, like in the subscales, it'll say weather permitting, they go outside, blah, 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 however many times, right? If there's like this week, there's a heat advisory. So none of this is going to apply if it's too hot or the sun is too great, whatever, or, when it's too cold in the winter. Are the children engaged? Well, so for this, they wanted to be very specific in saying this doesn't mean that they're just sitting there quietly and behaving. Children are seen and not heard. It means they're actually interested in paying attention to what's going on. You can have children that are very quiet, but they're like bored out of their minds or they're afraid they're going to get in trouble. Although I have not observed that in a classroom. So I've been blessed. I have not been in a classroom that has certainly not while I was there, been making children feel like they needed to be quiet because they were afraid. Play area is just a space where play materials are provided for children to use. It doesn't mean that they have an indoor, playground, large gross motor area or whatever. And an interest center is basically clearly defined play area intended for a particular kind of play. So I'm thinking dramatic play, kitchen area, I've seen them describe home living, block area, etc. Okay. So those are the definitions they refer to. That's just the first like run through of the PowerPoint, just the ITERs, just to get you kind of started. And then if you go to page 15, it tells you the different areas. And I did start to make a PowerPoint for this, but this is where I'm hoping, like at the end, that we can see how, because we're looking at developmentally appropriate practice in the 5 developmental domains. So we want to think about social, emotional, large gross motor, or physical, the language development, cognitive, right? So all those areas. And how does the ITERS kind of give you a sense of how DAP is approached in the classroom? So the subscales are space and furnishings, personal care routines, language and books, activities, interaction, and program structure. So while a lot of it's environmental in terms of the actual physical space and what they're doing, there's also, it's important, I think, to note that the teacher's role is critical in assessing the ITERs. How are children spoken to? How are ideas or how do children learn to be social beings? How do they learn to be a part of a group? How does that happen? And there's a whole section just on interaction that's really basically looking at the role of the teacher. Um, so we have the physical space. We have how do we take care of the basic care, personal care. But then how are we learning? We've got language and books, and then we have all these activities, which definitely includes that science and math, and then interaction, and then program structure. And program structure under it says schedule and transitions, free play, group play activities. So you're really getting a global look at a classroom, which also is going to hopefully give you just kind of a basic sense of like how all of adapt all this information we're learning all semester, and we learned in Intro to Early Childhood too. How is it applied in the classroom? And that's kind of like what they hope to assess through this. And there's areas where you're like, well, it doesn't really give a sense of XYZ. Nothing's perfect, right? This is a window. An instrument is a window into, how a classroom is doing in approaching those areas of development. And that's really what the ITERS is about. The Child Development Council has for years, I used to be on their board, would be consulted to come in and do an ITERS, because sometimes doing an ITERS on yourself, we have too many biases, or we know something's in the closet, we just bring it out today. We're probably not going to ding ourselves on that, right? We need to have an objective person come in. And sometimes too, like, it's hard to say, oh, I didn't realize I had that look on my face while I was doing that. Or I didn't realize I said, things in a negative way X amount of times. You need an objective person. So as teachers, we need to be willing to hear that without being like, they said I wasn't good. No, we're saying this is like how it could be even better. Okay. And sometimes you just need someone else to kind of do that objective observation, um, to give you that feedback. But that's also why sometimes teaching can be like, you really have to be self-reflective and call yourself out on your own stuff, right? Because we don't have people to always come in and do these things. We have so many other things we're responsible for. So that's often why I talk a lot about creating a reflective practice and really thinking, oh, I really need to make sure I don't say no so many times during the day. I need to practice, saying, use your walking feet, let's use our inside voices, things that don't convey such a negative, or um, just the word no all the time can really put a different spin on things, right? Let's save that for a crisis time where someone's in danger and we want to be like, no, they hear no all the time. Doesn't have the same impact. All right. So that's just to get us started on the ITERS. Thank you.